Good morning. I'm not as tall as David or Hans, so I'll pull this down a wee bit. Happy Saturday morning. This is great. Good to welcome you here to talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, but will, as I shared with Hans this week, kind of tone down the passion a little bit since I'm kind of providing a theoretical framework. That sounds really less passionate, dispassionate. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Allison Harris and Begonia Jao and Dr. Toki for just inviting me to be here, for working alongside me to kind of get these thoughts on paper. For myself, social entrepreneurship is a big and massive field, and so I really want to kind of tone it into just a conversation about some of the thought leaders and maybe introduce you to some concepts, define the term a little bit, and then sort of build from there. Hans joked that I'm a soccer mom, right? So he calls me a soccer mom, and I'm not sure exactly what that phrase means anymore. I tend to think of this over-anxious mother on the sideline. I have two sons, they're 16 and 13, and they both play soccer. I love it myself. I was out there talking with Dr. Stevenson and a gentleman from Ghana, and we were kind of talking about soccer and how important and fun, what a great game. And I told him, yeah, when I was in Trinidad, when I grew up in Trinidad, it would be me and the guys, because girls just didn't play soccer. So I played soccer and loved it and still do, and I love it that my sons play. So with that kind of little bit about me and sports, I never amounted to anything in terms of a soccer star or anything like that. That was my big hope. But I want to share with you some deep ideas about social entrepreneurship. Here are my hopes for the session: to explore the new field and define the term social entrepreneurship. It's a difficult term to explore, to really kind of pin down and define. To identify some thought leaders so that you can go out and read and think yourself. To talk about the impact on business and nonprofits, an opportunity, of course, for social action in society, a potential, in my mind, for a reformation of capitalism, and suggest ways in which social entrepreneurship can be attached to sports enterprises. I'm going to begin with David Bornstein. David Bornstein is a New York Times columnist, or used to be before he took off and wrote the book, How to Change the World. It's kind of recognized as the Bible in social entrepreneurship. He's now written a smaller book called Social Entrepreneurship, What Everyone Needs to Know, and it's a much smaller book than his initial one. David Bornstein describes social entrepreneurship as a process by which citizens build or transform institutions to advance solutions to social problems. So I'm going to say this, that there's not one single definition for the idea of social entrepreneurship. For the idea of entrepreneurship, it's a broad idea, and for the idea of social, it's too complex to pin down. So you'll hear some different kind of thought leaders, David Bornstein, of course, being one of them. Stephen Goldberg has written a book, Billions of Drops in Millions of Buckets, and he says social entrepreneurs carry out innovations that blend methods from the worlds of business and philanthropy to create social value that is sustainable and has the potential for large-scale impact. Of course, I teach here at Eastern, and I've been teaching social entrepreneurship for a little bit. In my 2011 undergraduate business class, I asked them to define for themselves this term after we've talked about it for a wee bit. And here are some great definitions that they've come up with. Social entrepreneurship is a dynamic process of vision, change, and creation, harnessed to create social value. The students developed this definition themselves. The graduate course, the MBA students this past year described it this way: using a business model, social entrepreneurs are creators of social value, pursuing opportunities, and closing gaps in society. Their success is measured by societal impact. I like the closing gaps piece. For my own self, I've come to think of the field as market imperatives with missional objectives. I like the idea of blending market and mission together, and so I'm pretty passionate about that. Social entrepreneurship can sit on a spectrum. That spectrum can start with a nonprofit entity, a traditional nonprofit, wanting to have a social mission, and that's quite fine. It can be a nonprofit that's income generating. It can be a social enterprise fund that just grants and not necessarily tries to attract revenue in terms of providing services. It can be a socially responsible business. It can be a corporation practicing social responsibility. Or it can be undertaken in a traditional for-profit model. The further you go out into the spectrum, of course, the more difficult it is, right? This triple bottom line piece is getting a lot of traction in our society, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So some of the characteristics of entrepreneurs, you know, right? They're passionate about their business. They're product and customer focused. Jean-Baptiste Say says the entrepreneur shifts economic resources out of an area of lower productivity and into an area of higher productivity and greater yield. According to Greg Dees, he's another significant person in the field of social entrepreneurship, he says social entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs with a social mission. The ability to fail and keep on trying. So one of the tenacity, this idea of tenacity despite failure is key for the social entrepreneur. It's difficult enough to start a business. It's even harder to start a business that's targeted towards solving some social issue like poverty. I took a flight in September and was on the plane with a gentleman who, interestingly enough, had just finished a lifetime of being in business and was just bought out by his company. So about 10 to 15 million kind of net worth. So he was pretty proud of that, and he ought to be. That was good stuff. So we got to talking about what we did, and I asked him, I said, you know, could you tell me when you've ever failed? Sounds like you've been pretty successful. If you're being bought out for 10 to 15 million currently, that sounds kind of successful. Is there something that you've failed at? And he actually said, well, no one's ever asked me that question. I've never been asked that question about failure. So give me a second and I'll think about it. And he thought about it, and it was part of the answer he gave about 10 minutes into flight time was, well, you know how I failed? I never trusted the people under me. Or I always wanted to kind of take over the stuff that they were doing because I was a perfectionist. And I looked at him and I thought, wow, that's really great. How did you solve that problem? He says, I hired somebody who could manage the staff much better than me and who could trust the staff to do that work and who empowered the staff to get things done. Maybe not to my standards, but it carried on. And so he left his business with 60 people being employed. Very much a success, but recognizing his own role in failure. Execution intelligence. Execution intelligence just is this idea, turning an idea into a viable business opportunity takes execution intelligence. I came across a Chinese proverb that I quite like. To open a business is very easy. To keep it open is very difficult. Sounds fairly common sense. Howard Schultz, the owner of Starbucks, the CEO of Starbucks, bought this one company, one store front down in the Seattle waterfront, which had been there for years before he bought it, and decided, hey, in 1977, I'm going to start opening a bunch of these little branches. Now we all know Starbucks to be a national global brand. Now we've all probably drank Starbucks. It's on every street corner in Seattle and here too. On my way to work, I passed 2 Starbucks. He had execution intelligence. Hard workers, entrepreneurs are hard workers, and they're driven for outcomes. So the characteristics of the social entrepreneur, in addition, remembering Greg Dees's kind of definition of the social entrepreneur as the entrepreneur with social objectives, is they adopt a mission to create social value. They pursue new opportunities to serve the mission. They're agents of social change, transformative forces. They're continuous improvement and adaptation, restless in the pursuit of their vision. I like what Peter Drucker says, the management guru. He says, the social entrepreneur changes the performance capacity of society. Again, back to the MBAs defining it as closing gaps, right? The social entrepreneur's task is to change the performance capacity of society. So social entrepreneurs, Gregory Dees suggests, social and business entrepreneurs uncover and create a new opportunity through a process of exploration, innovation, experimentation, and resource mobilization. So those of you involved in sports, you know how hard it is to change the performance capacity of the human body, much less to change the performance capacity of an entire society. Yeah, the task before us is monumental. So I'm going to kind of change gears here a little bit and steep into this model, this business model that's a triple bottom line. You've heard it said. And that relates to people, planet, and profit. So modern day capitalism has taken on this idea, which Milton Friedman sort of developed and posited, right? That the business of business is business, right? You're in business to make a profit and to return maximum profit for your shareholders. Well, that predetermines that the shareholder is this one-dimensional person. That all they care about is financial profit. We live in a society today that's changing. We've watched it change. It's no longer just concerned about how much money a person makes. It wants to attach money and meaning. One of the great books that's selling like hotcakes and still is The Purpose-Driven Life, right? People want profit and purpose. They want to have their cake, in a sense, and eat it too. And they ought to. This is good stuff that they ought to be putting together. So in this model of a triple bottom line, where businesses are slowly recognizing that they can't just pursue a maximum profit model anymore. And in fact, maybe even to recognize that people and planet are externalities that now need to be brought into how they think about their own businesses. So I began a long time ago to ask a question: what is the role of business in society? That question had to do with how should we conduct the activity of business in terms of its scope and reach in Western society, and recognize that even here today we've participated as consumers in some way, form, or fashion in our business and commercial sector. We are not just economic beings, though. We are also social people. We are relational. We have those kinds of needs. We have an overarching sense in which our humanity comes with us everywhere we go. Shouldn't business be paying attention to that? As Hans pointed out, even when you go to hotel rooms, yeah, you've got the reminder that they can wash their towels every 3 days, and that's just effective and efficient. It's good business, yeah, because at the end of the day it reduces cost, but it reduces cost not just to their bottom line, it reduces the cost and wear and tear on our environment. We are socially minded people, and like never before. So in the field of social entrepreneurship, we have the emergence of this corrective within modern day capitalism to say, let's talk about people, let's talk about planet, let's talk about profit. If you want profit to increase, you're going to actually focus on people. It's a proven fact that if people are motivated and are allowed to be innovative and creative, that you're actually going to find profitability return to your company. Right? Companies lose billions of dollars every year because their workers are unproductive, because they've not found a way to release those talents. You think of places like Google and Apple, part of what keeps them in business is being able to get the people factor and get it right so that people can innovate and be creative. They need a level of freedom and openness in order to do that. It is fast known, and this is the thing that's caught on. We all know that we cannot keep consuming on our planet like we have been. We won't have a planet. By some estimates, as the global south rises, if we've taught them to consume like the north, we'll need 3 planets if they live like a regular UK citizen. If they live like an American, we're going to need 5 planets. So we've reached a point where limited resources within our own world is saying we need to rethink our business model. And so what we found is this response within the citizen sector. It's a large-scale, globally dispersed, more systematic approaches to the problem outside the scope of government and churches. These persons rising up are catalysts of change, and there's beneficial effects of entrepreneurship. This is that citizen sector that Bornstein is talking about. And so I want to introduce you to a few heroes in the field, the citizen sector, regular people who did extraordinary things, and then it grew. You might have heard of this next one. Muhammad Yunus, the winner, together with the Grameen Bank, is the winner of the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize. And Muhammad Yunus started the Grameen Bank, which is in Bangladeshi the term for village, with $27. It is an $80 million banking industry today to lift people out of poverty. This is what he says. People are not one-dimensional entities. They're not just economic entities. They are excitingly multidimensional. The presence of our multidimensional personalities mean not every business should be bound to serve the single objective of profit maximization. So Yunus took $27 and loaned it to some village women, who then took that money and didn't go to the local loaners, loan sharks, and employed that money and then repaid Yunus. And he figured, well, look, if I were to see this again, I would start to take my risk on the poor. And he started to believe, look, the poor are resourceful. They've eked out an existence to this point. Surely they can have ideas as to how to solve some of the problems that they face in their own society. And he saw them as people who were excitingly multidimensional, right? Not just about creating profit and making a livelihood with money, but about creating a way to live that would both solve social issues in terms of sending kids to school or providing meals at home or whatever, so that they could start to be people who were living meaningful lives. So Muhammad Yunus, Creating a World Without Poverty, is a book that he's written that kind of catalogs where he thinks business is heading in this field. A few weeks, I think it was maybe a couple months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Bill Drayton. Bill Drayton is one of the heroes in the social entrepreneurship space. He founded the Ashoka Foundation, Ashoka Innovators for the Public. Ashoka means the absence of sorrow. And Bill Drayton created an organization that was looking for people who could make a scratch on history. And if you know him, he's just this really quiet, centered man, and I quite like that idea that you can make a scratch on history. He says in an interview with him, look, we don't want to just teach fishing. You know, you've heard, you give a man a fish, you teach him for, you know, he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he lives for a lifetime, right? Well, yeah, there's good stuff in teaching, but what Drayton was setting out to do was actually to change the fishing industry. To change the fishing industry. He has spent over $65 million in direct funding and has helped analyze social entrepreneurship strategies. He's developed an array of professional services to assist entrepreneurs in developing parts of the world and connect them to major companies who construct social business ventures. Drayton says these individuals are conceived of and relentlessly pursue new ideas designed to solve social problems on a wide variety, on a wide scale, by changing the system that undergird the problem. Changing the system. We're talking system change. I'm going to introduce you. You might know the name Jacqueline Novorgratz and the Acumen Fund. I like what she says. If you don't know the little thing that I kind of steal from all the time, it's this TED.com. How many of you have heard of TED? Yeah, she's out there with TED, and she's done this great thing. When you hear her talk, it's so engaging. And one of the things she says that I totally hook on to is dignity is more important than wealth. The human dignity is more important than wealth. So while we want to engage in business to make a profit, it is not the sole end of business. It's not the telos of business. The telos of business is about allowing people to be in relationships and live meaningful lives. And they can do that, be good to the planet, and make a profit. I'll tell you that towards the end of this presentation kind of some of my own thinking about how that's happened. Jackie Flaherty, Kiva. Kiva is an organization that you can do with online lending, small amounts of money. By pledging certain small amounts of loans, they'll take it and give it to people in the developing parts of the world. You can actually pick those projects that you work on, less than $400, and you can make significant impact in developing parts of the world. The Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship is another one. Skoll Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, those guys are funding social entrepreneurship movies. They're holding conferences. They're just bringing up the thought leaders. Locally here, I want to kind of point to a couple. Capital for Good Impact, which is in Wayne, actually is a fund that started through Geneva Global, which is a philanthropic organization here in Wayne. Last June asked if I would join their board, and when we moved to this area 8 years ago, I would have done janitorial services at Geneva Global just to be around the place. I had heard of them and the work that they were doing, was fascinated by the kinds of things that they were doing, and that they were spurring entrepreneurship and funding things that had social value. Well, Capital for Good received about $10 million worth of funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Global Health Advocacy Network started to disperse these funds. So locally, Capital for Good was created for the purpose of connecting donors and grant makers from international and domestic folks to work together in the areas of education, health, human liberty, and economic empowerment. Our mission is really to alleviate poverty and suffering and to advocate for health, education, and prosperity of people in the marginal world. I asked yesterday the CFO if we had done stuff with sports, because I'm fairly new since June to the organization. And in 2012, Capital for Good gave United Against Malaria, an international alliance that utilizes football, or soccer as it's called here, as a platform to increase public awareness of malaria prevention and treatment messages at football games and other countries across the continent. Capital for Good provided them with $644,897 worth of funding. Interestingly enough, in 2012, the Confederation of African Football League, the governing body of the African football, named United Against Malaria the official social program for the 2013 Orange Africa Cup of Nations. So it's a huge deal for the fund. And right here locally, there are investment dollars being channeled from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to start to spur this work going on in Africa. Also, locally here, there are a couple other key local social entrepreneurs. Judy Wicks, she's the owner and founder of White Dog Cafe in Philadelphia. There's a branch here now in Wayne. And Judy Wicks has just written a book entitled Good Morning, Beautiful Business. And she has started into this whole space of trying to be this triple bottom line idea, where she's taken a regular cafe and done locally sourced foods and healthy foods and provided it and been very, very successful. Her new book, Good Morning, Beautiful Business, sort of catalogs her own move in that space. And then J. Cohen Gilbert, one of the co-founders of B Lab from the B Corporation, and the B Corporation is an entity that's allowing people to start to organize under this triple bottom line model, and B Lab actually is right here in Paoli, and they have now, I think, some 500 businesses that are working with them, and they have metrics on their site. So I'm just going to recommend that if you Google B Corporation, you'll be able to see the different kinds of businesses that are starting to line up and the change in the business landscape. So then let's talk a little bit now about social entrepreneurship in sports. We've talked a little bit about business and the social relationship of business, but sports is very social. We all play sports for the enjoyment. We're connecting with other people. Both fields, I think, nurture the potential of people. Whether it's in business or whether it's physical, both fields are doing that. They're capturing, or they're able to capture the energy of the citizen sector. They're grounding both activities in relationships. The business model that is complementary to the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, I think can most efficiently be brought into the sports enterprise. So these two fields are becoming really important for them to dovetail, and we can start to think about that. Sports for me is an opportunity to connect with the other person. Business for me is an opportunity to connect with other people. I like business because it is deeply relational. I like to transact business not because of just the exchange of money or funds, but the exchange of persons that can happen in the medium of business. I think you can have that very thing in sports. The entrepreneurial mindset, I think, is as we take on this idea of social entrepreneurship and try to bring it and bring societal change is difficult. This is a great quote from the Prince. "There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct than to take a lead in the introduction of a new order of things, because the innovation has for enemies all those who have done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders of those who may do well under the new." We are in a new world. Our world is engaging in a new way of thinking about business, in a new way of interacting. And both for-profits and non-profits, in order to be successful in this new world, will need to think about creating social value. What are your products and services, and how do they create social value? Not just monetary value. So those are some of the things that I want to share with you. I'm going to share a final thought and then talk a little bit about two things that I'm doing, share two personal stories with you. I think everyone is a change maker. I think everyone can be a change maker. I think that's the great thing about social entrepreneurship. It is the emergence of the citizen sector, and we are all citizens. In my early 30s, I was in Seattle. I lived in Seattle, and I was really privileged to be invited to work at a company called Pura Vida Coffee. And Pura Vida Coffee took this challenge of trying to be a social entrepreneur in a space that hadn't really defined the business. So this company, coffee growing company, or company in Seattle, sitting across the street from Starbucks, right? We brought coffee from coffee growing regions in the world and brought it here, and green coffee, and roasted it and sold it. And the profits of that coffee were then sent back to Costa Rica and the street kids in Costa Rica. It created a great opportunity to raise awareness of the needs of the street kids in Costa Rica, but it also provided people with a product that they could use and participate in what was happening somewhere else around the world. Pura Vida Coffee created a scratch in my mind, a scratch on history. I'm privileged to direct the MBA program here at Eastern University. And this MBA program desires to take people who want to look at business and create their scratch on history. It wants to take business and head into parts of the world that won't be easy to sustain business, and yet it wants to create an opportunity through business to allow people to have a livelihood, to address social issues. They come to Eastern because they want to be prepared for that. They want to have the convergence of market and mission in their lives. So fundamentally, it's an opportunity to think about that particular role for individuals. If someone, when I was growing up in Trinidad, told me that there would be some day in which I would be sitting on a board like Capital for Good Impact, creating opportunities for entrepreneurs in the developing parts of the world, and having hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, to spend in that space, I would have told them they were crazy, right? We have no idea how things are going to work. I think there is a great design that God has for us. And as we participate and lean into things, ways are being opened up. I'm making my scratch, or I hope my scratch. So let me leave you with this. Let us be the change that we want to be in our hurting world, right? I invite my students to do this. That the key way is to unleash potential of people to innovate, create, and catalyze things. People are remarkably creative, and through their efforts, they can leave their scratch on history. I'm pleased to invite you to leave your scratch on history. Thank you.